There's something big coming to Star Park these Brawly days, but we don't want to ruin the surprise yet.
Well, it seems that something big was just the Toy Story collab, and most of the community is pretty upset about it. They feel misled, and honestly, I have to agree. Using the phrase Star Park led everyone to believe that the next chapter of lore would be arriving. But instead, it was just another temporary collaboration. Now, don't get me wrong, it's cool, but it's honestly disappointing. In today's video, we're going to be going over the rather confusing lore of Brawl Stars, answering questions like, will there be any more lore? Why are there conflicting brawler backstories? And can we expect something that ties everything together? The best place to start this discussion is with Star Park, as that is the ultimate phrase. As of late, everything seems to be in Star Park, but that doesn't make any sense. This new brawler is in Star Park, this event is in Star Park, and this feature is coming to Star Park. I worry that this word has become something so big that they don't even know what it really means. Take this tweet from 2020, where a user asks if something will be coming from Star Park, obviously referring to the lore campaign that just ended a few months prior, to which Danny replies saying everything is. Yes, Brawl Stars takes place within Star Park, but the bottom line is, due to the way it was introduced, that word is almost always going to be associated with lore. From what we knew back in 2020, Star Park was, as the name implied, an amusement park. But as of recently, things are just different. The October 2024 update informed us that the Angels and Demons event was in Star Park, which honestly doesn't make any sense. This leads me to believe that Star Park and Brawl Stars might just be interchangeable terms at this point. I mean, how else can you explain the fact that we are seeing all of this new content set in a park that's supposedly no longer in operation? The timeline just doesn't add up. If Star Park existed in the mid-1900s and shut down shortly after, how is it still relevant today? Why does it keep popping up in almost every new update? Are they rebranding it to mean something else? Or is this just the devs throwing the word Star Park around because it sounds cool? Unfortunately, it isn't the only thing that doesn't make sense, but more on that later. In a post made by Danny late last year, he highlighted that the lore is only making a comeback integrated within the game experience. This leads me to believe that they will be potentially moving away from the major lore breakthroughs like the investor video or starpark.biz, and instead taking smaller pieces of brawler lore that was scattered throughout those larger campaigns. From there, they might be planning to create a more cohesive story about who the brawlers are and what their purpose is. This ultimately means steering away from radioactive gas, mind control devices, and distressed employees of a theme park, and instead hone in on more simplistic and digestible material for the general audience. That being said, they might still scatter Easter eggs and details relating to those ideas within certain brawlers who it fits well with. They don't want to completely eradicate what was existing before, since in a past Time to Explain podcast episode, Danny informed us that it is still canon. So this could instead mean slowly moving away from what they did before because of how big it became in terms of scope, community expectations, and overall goals for future lore. When it comes to the lore campaign from 2020, I think we can all agree that it was simply amazing. One, because it really came out of left field, and two, because of how ambitious it was. One could say a little too ambitious. There might have been some hints that something massive was on the horizon, but no one really knew what it all meant. But when the investor video arrived, everyone was in pure disbelief. It was clear that extensive time and effort was put into every intricate detail, but something was lacking, and it was lacking even more in the CCTV campaign from 2023. It's important that with every introduction into a theme, character, or idea, a resolution is bound to happen. However, too much of what was introduced was left in the air with no real conclusion. For instance, a big piece of the 2020 lore was the spewed stickers, and we got zero backstory or deeper understanding of what it really meant. To be honest, even to this day, we don't even know if Star Park Union of Distressed Employees is the actual acronym. We sort of just ran with that because Kairos' theory made logical sense. But that is where the issue arises. We just assume stuff to be true without knowing if it is. But that is more so at the fault of the writers, since it's their job to have the storyline and everything included in it clearly explained. And speaking of things that need to be clearly explained, let me quickly tell you about a service that can help you clear up problems with your gaming experience. Gear Up Booster. Now I know, some of you saw my last video talking about this app, and might have had some concerns because it's a paid service, and that's completely understandable. But I have something really exciting to share. I was given a unique code that allows for an additional free trial of Gear Up Booster for 1 day on top of the existing 3-day trial. This gives you a total of 4 days to explore the benefits. And the best part, you don't even need to enter any payment information. You can literally just sign up and get access to all the features. No strings attached. I really believe this could help you, especially if you're looking to push brawlers to the max rank. It optimizes FPS to ensure that your gaming network is stable. So check out the link in the pinned comment below to grab your free trial of Gear Up Booster. Now let's get back into the confusing lore surrounding Spewed, because I find it quite funny that these stickers are appearing on media pieces all over social media, but it really doesn't mean anything, apart from being a union sticker. This is because we don't even know what it really is, and that is just one of the many issues surrounding certain storyline elements. Too much of what is believed to be important story points or pieces in a lore campaign are just left unanswered. However, things unfortunately take a turn for the worse with the 2023 CCTV campaign, because it ended up causing more confusion and raising many more questions than answers. Too much of what was implied throughout certain time codes contradicted what we believed were the case in 2020. For instance, the CCTV lore lacked an overall cohesive and clear story, and as a result, it was very hard to follow any events that occurred. As interesting as the world building was, the overall unclear order of events and narrative is what brought the lore down the most. It honestly felt like a rushed attempt to recreate the magic from the 2020 lore campaign. That honestly sounds crazy to say, since it was 3 years after the investor video, but nevertheless, it still felt incomplete and like it was lacking depth. Certain timecode events we received, like the Spike Fart, are disconnected from the original lore. To be completely honest, as a whole, it's not very connected to much of the lore we received prior. This becomes even more clear when we compare it side by side with WKBRL, the investor video, and StarPark.biz. Even though they are supposed to be their own unique campaigns, they should still connect well enough to each other as opposed to contradicting each other in more ways than one. This was because it was advertised as the next chapter of Star Park lore, and it was always implied that Star Park was what we saw within the investor video. I do feel like the change in studios is one of the reasons for this disconnection. The first 2 campaigns, which did all of the things you see here, were made by Whedon and Kennedy. The CCTV and a couple of non-lore related animations, however, were done by a new studio called Buck. Instead of continuing their contract with the first studio, they decided to give it a go with someone new. So it's no wonder it feels different. They gave the general premise of the lore to a different set of artists, and what came out of it was in a different style, more fitting of the Brawl Stars we're familiar with playing. But again, in doing so, it makes it feel more like Brawl Stars than Star Park, which, while I'm sure Frank sees the two as having the same exact meaning, it also symbolizes different eras in the game's development. Case in point, the art book. Brawlers never try to kill each other. It's all about playful brawling with no consequences or retribution. Backstories aren't complex and are often deliberately left vague for the player community to fill in the gaps while on the lookout for Easter eggs. This is in stark contrast to everything Star Park, from the pain and torture of brawling, to the crying from the radio on the voice that hears you, even down to the more concrete narrative that's being told. These are two opposites in every way that are both trying to exist in the same exact piece of media, and it's not working. When it comes to the timeline, there are huge holes. At best, there are like 20 to 30 whole years between the end of the investor video and the CCTV campaign. What happened in the meantime? It's unlikely that we'll ever get the answer to this, because as we know, they will be turning their attention over to brawler-related lore, but it would be nice to get an accurate idea on when everything takes place at some point, because time plays a major role in understanding the lore. Unfortunately, lore related to these campaigns are not the only concerns. It's unclear what is actually canon and what isn't, and I'm not just talking about things that might have been effectively retconned. For example, are brawler descriptions canon? I would assume so, since they recently revised every brawler description within the game. But that's where an issue arises. Are the new revisions what we should take to be canon? Does that mean everything before it is officially retconned? We honestly don't know because that wasn't clearly communicated to us. A great example of this is Gus. For the longest time, he was a ghost, and then when they revised his description, that was no longer the case. The inconsistency here is rather annoying, and it causes a pretty heated divide between the community, especially when there are people out there trying to create backstories for these characters with limited information provided to them. You can't just change a character's backstory on a whim without causing confusion, especially when so many players are invested in these characters. Not only that, but for years before the revision, it was believed that he was a ghost, which meant promotional videos, animations, and posts all relayed Gus as a ghost. But he's not the only one. Look at Dynamite. His backstory has gone through so many iterations in official release. First, he was a retired miner that just missed blowing stuff up. Then he was a mysterious miner who got lost down a mine and went crazy. And now he's back to being a prospector who's working for Star Park. And yes, there are theories that explain it, but then again, people who don't know, don't care, or disagree with that are just gonna look at the changed backstories, take a look at the seemingly changed lore, which just so happens to get deleted from the channel, and go, huh, guess the old lore is dead now. It's not just brawler descriptions and the campaigns that are conflicting. Just this year, we received the good random skins, and to everyone's shock, Melody was there. For the longest time, it was believed and heavily implied that Melody was part of a rival group against the good randoms, but now finds herself joining the good randoms group. How does that work? Well, at least in this case, it feels like the developers are disregarding the lore for the sake of the game's popularity and buzz, because we all know how popular Melody is as a character.
See you when you grow up.
While this may not be a major concern, it adds to the evidence that what was once believed is now questionable. However, just because it wasn't as widely known in comparison to other lore, doesn't mean it should be changed. Even beyond what is known to be canon or not, there are other issues. Some things just don't make sense, while others aren't explained clearly enough. For instance, one could argue that Pearl does not fit in her trio with Belle and Sam, and I honestly agree. A point could be made that it was to show that Sam may have a soft spot for her, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we weren't given enough backstory on the relationship to know why she belongs in their trio. If it is for an intended lore reason, most of the community hasn't even picked up on it, and that is a big problem, especially since they have run with the idea that Sam hates robots, to the point of loathing them. So unfortunately, the one-sentence explanation we are given in Pearl's description is not enough to suffice why she's in their trio. The real challenge here is that not all of the existing lore is fully fleshed out, and some connections between characters are still very much up in the air. Let's talk about trios, for example. For these trios to make sense, the characters need to be interwoven with one another. Their backstories should complement each other, almost like Colt and Shelly, two peas in a pod. Right now, some trios feel like the characters were just thrown together because it sounded cool, rather than being carefully designed, keeping lore in mind. This disconnect makes it harder for players to truly buy into these relationships, and ultimately, it hurts the overall narrative. A great example of this is the Shaman trio, with Bo, Leon, and Nita. They are not only tied together because of their character's jungle theme, but their familial relationship as well. Leon is Nita's brother, and Bo is their joint stepdad. That is why conceptually, they are a perfect trio, and grounded in lore as well. While it's obviously not possible for every single trio in the game to have lore connections based on family relatives, the relationship should make sense based on each brawler's attributes. Someone that hates robots should not have a robot in their trio. Maybe that's too on the nose, but you get my point. So, moving forward, what's next for the lore? Well, after going through all of the roadmap teasers and reviewing old Brawl Stars posts, I think I've cracked the code, and it's probably not what you think. The more I think about it, the more I believe we could be heading towards a story mode. Frank has hinted that they're not totally focused on PvE right now, but what if an upcoming update serves as a test run for a future story mode? Now, here's where things get interesting. A recent Brawl Stars ad gave us a glimpse of what looked like Star Park Island. The image showed the island with locations clearly tied to different environments within the game, almost like a map of Star Park itself. This is something that we really haven't seen before, and it makes me think that the devs might have a bigger plan for Star Park than we originally realized. This island could be the key to unlocking a new era of the Brawl Stars story. Imagine if, instead of just dropping new content each update, we actually got to explore different sectors of Star Park Island, each with its own unique environment, lore, and challenges. You could explore areas inspired by existing Brawl Stars maps like the Wild West, or even new environments that expand the story and give more context to the game's setting. Imagine this. A section of Star Park is unlocked for exploration, and each environment has a different set of characters to interact with. You could walk through the Wild West area, meet Colt and Shelly, and take on unique challenges. There could even be special rewards for completing missions related to each character's lore. As you complete a level, you are provided with more backstory on the characters and where they fit in within the Brawl Stars universe. It's a way for new and returning players to dive deeper into the history of Brawl Stars and explore its vast universe. Think of it like a seasonal event where we get to interact with the world of Brawl Stars in a more immersive way. The biggest concern many players have is how will this connect to existing lore? Will everything we've learned so far be thrown out the window? A story mode could be the solution to these issues. It could serve as the missing piece that ties all of the loose ends together, giving us a concrete timeline and resolving some of these inconsistencies. Now, that being said, since the CCTV campaign sort of alters some pre-established lore and facts about certain brawlers, we may see this being the case if and when a story mode is added, because it would be impossible for them to keep everything they've said for years relevant and applicable to the game in the stage it's currently in. They may want to simplify each of the brawlers' backstories to make it less dependent on the Star Park lore from 2020 for the brawlers it applies to. One key thing to keep in mind is that Star Park has changed a lot over the years. In earlier Brawl Stars advertisements, we saw Star Park as an isolated and mysterious amusement park, but the recent ads have hinted at it being an island. It's a huge shift, but it could be the key to finally unlocking the full mystery of Star Park. It's clear from the roadmap video that the devs are planning on bringing the lore directly into the game to give us a clearer understanding of each brawler. And that's a step in the right direction. However, if they're going to make lore a central part of the game, they need to be absolutely certain about what the lore is. They can't afford to be vague about a character's backstory, and especially not about their connections to each other. Let's say they add a lore page for each brawler in the game. Once those details are there, it's going to shape how we understand these characters forever. So it's vital that the connections between brawlers, especially those in trios, are crystal clear. No more maybe or could be or should be. The relationships between brawlers need to feel real, significant, and plausible. They should make sure that each brawler's backstory is fully fleshed out before putting it in the game. It's better to take the time to ensure everything makes sense than to rush it and risk introducing inconsistencies that'll make the lore feel disjointed. That is why a potential story mode is so important. It's a chance to not only flesh out individual characters, but to solidify the relationships with each other. If we get to explore different sectors of Star Park Island and interact with various trios, the lore behind each character will have a natural place to expand. It goes without saying, but there are many plot holes and inconsistencies that have frankly gone unnoticed. And if the Brawl team is planning on integrating the lore into the game to make it more accessible to all players, it's important that these points be addressed. Ensure consistent brawler connections. If Brawl Stars wants to continue introducing new brawlers and trios, they absolutely need to focus on ensuring that the connections between characters make sense. If the devs are serious about integrating lore into the game, every trio should feel logically connected, with each brawler's backstory contributing to the group dynamic. And please, do something about Pearl. Fix lore inconsistencies. Gus being a ghost 1 minute and not a ghost the next? That has to be addressed. A character's true backstory or intent cannot be changing all the time. They need to lock in a consistent backstory for every character and stick with it. Have a thorough review. Hire writers to make sure that everything is tied together nicely story-wise, and make sure they do not contradict lore from the past. And if the contradictions are intended, make sure they're explained. In addition, too much of what was introduced to us throughout various campaigns has just flown under the radar because we don't even know what it is. Some significant plot points from the lore could have been missed because they 1. Weren't emphasized enough, or 2. It didn't tie into what seemed like the direction the lore was going. So make sure everything aligns. Incorporate a real mystery. I speak for the entire community when I say we like solving things. We love the mystery and even the darker themes. It allows for a more serious tone to be brought out. That being said, don't directly tell us. Provide us with various unique puzzles or story points because it opens the door for theory crafting and various opinions on events to develop. Make it scary or don't, but please stick to one because sometimes it feels cheap when you try to imitate horror without any stakes. If death is not involved, then why should we care? What is the end result or consequence? Some might argue that it's a children's game, so it should probably steer away from those darker themes. However, look at Five Nights at Freddy's. It is not inherently kid-friendly, yet kids still like it. And the same could be the case with Brawl Stars. Define Star Park. What is Star Park in this new era of Brawl Stars? Is it still a park, or has it become something more, or something less? They need to nail this down and stick with it, especially if they plan on adding it to the game's lore permanently. And also, don't use the words freely, because people will expect it to be something lore related, and if it's not, well, let's just say it will cause more and more disappointment. The name was only introduced in the lore campaign, and it is always going to be remembered as just that.